We have a special guest here, Mr. Adini. If you would like to take one of his cards and pass it around the group, Lou, appreciate that. Mr. Adini is an expert in phase 1, phase 2. It's actually one of the few times you see someone that had engineering degree.
I have engineering degree.
Engineering degree. That actually turned it into something very useful for us in the business. So, congratulations on that. So we can get started. We're going to let Mr. Adini do his presentation.
My turn. So, would you like me to stand or sit? How do you prefer?
Yes. However you're comfortable.
What did you say? Stand? Great. All right. So, my name is Ami, A-M-I, Adini, A-D-I-N-I. And by my accent, I'm Israeli. I came here in 1977. Grew up and got educated in Israel in my engineering degree in mechanical engineering with additional credits in nuclear and chemical engineering. I, right away after graduation, went to work for the Israeli government in the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission. Worked for 8 years in the nuclear facilities, then moved to work in chemical facilities. Immigrated to the US in 1977, worked with some very large engineering companies back in Connecticut and here in Pasadena. And eventually, when was it, 1987, I think, 1987, 88, started my own business as a consultant and became a consultant and a contractor. I did, in the 1990s, we did lots of gasoline stations. At the time, it was, we removed probably a couple of thousands of tanks. We installed about maybe 40 or more gasoline stations. We did all the contamination and gradually, at the same time, we moved to the phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 and environmental site assessments. And I'll talk to you today about this thing that we call phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments. And feel free to ask me any question as I talk. This is a very informal and we'll try to make it easy to understand as much as I can. The phase 1, for the life of me, I don't know how the name came about. I've done a lot of research, but I guess logically it's kind of phase 1, it's the first step. But the name came about in the very early, in the mid 1980s. In the late 1970s, about 1976 or thereabout, there was a case of a love canal in the state of New York, where lots of residents and families got sick and got all kind of birth defects, and there was a big issue out of it, and they found out that the entire community was built on a landfill. And so then...
You're talking about Love Canal.
Love Canal,
Yes.
About Love Canal, was built on a toxic landfill. And so then the country and the Congress became more cognizant, more aware to the situation. And they said we need to correct it. And they found out it was not only Love Canal case, there were many other landfills over the nations. And they said, well, we need to handle all these landfills. And they passed the law, which they called the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Liability Act, which was basically, we are going to correct the situation. And we need money. And so they allocated about $1 billion, which in today money is cheap change, you know. But at the time it was a big money, and allocated about $1 billion, and they called it Super Fund. Therefore, the name of the law, of the circular law, became Superfund. That's how it started. And they said, okay, we're giving money, but the government said, okay, now that we give the money, we need to get it back. So how do we get it back? We get it back from the responsible parties. So whoever we find that is responsible for all this contamination will pay for it. So and who are the responsible parties? Okay, of course the owners, then the operators, then anybody who brought contamination there, and anybody that had anything to do with it, they will pay for it. And then they found out that they had a lot more than what they thought. There was landfills all over the country. Okay, and so so they said in the law, they created the concept of several joint and strict liability at the time, which meant that if you had anything to do with a contaminated site that the government needs to clean it up, you will be responsible for it. And let us assume that the operator has gone bankrupt, so we will look for the owner. Let us assume that the owner has gone bankrupt, and we will look for the previous owner. Then we will look for whoever brought stuff into the site, and everybody became responsible. And so there was a big cry in the nation that said, well, they are innocent people. They buy land, and why do you make them responsible where 5 generations ago somebody contaminated it? So there was a big cry around 1985. They issued they called it SERA. It was like Superfund Amendment and Reauthorization Act, SERA, about 1985. And they invented the concept of innocent landowner defense about 1985. An innocent landowner defense means if you can prove to us that when you purchased the land, you had no idea of what you purchased, you had that you did enough research and you did not find anything and you bought it with good heart, okay, then we will keep you innocent, we will not go after you. So this was around 1985, the SERA law, and that created our phase 1 field. It came into, so it was really 1986, and I stepped into this field in 1988, in early 1988. So as it was being created, I stepped into it. One of my very first projects was with Texaco USA at the time. They had a big, huge penalty judgment against them, about $11 billion, the Pennzoil case, and they had to pay, and they had to liquidate lots of land, lots of oil field. So we gave them a bid, a price they could not refuse, and we went to do 72 oil fields to do a phase 1. And so I got the bid, I remember, and then we looked at it. I met with the Texaco people, and we said, okay, now we are going to do the phase 1. What is phase 1? What is phase 1? What are we supposed to do? I mean, we have a price for it, but at the time we were inventing it on the go, right? The scope of work. And in the 1988, the cost of the phase 1 at that time was about $5,000. And it's just because people didn't know how deep, how far, how much they need to go about it. So there it went, and I remember we went then to the city of Anaheim. We did the entire civic district of city of 500 properties at the time, where is today City Hall and the civic district. We cleared up all of this area for them. We went to the city of Arcadia. They have this Embassy Suites hotel there. Next to it there was a slide. And all of this at the time we did, yet with no definition for a phase 1, and the industry was developing. And around 1991, the industry got together, the regulators, the attorneys, the consultants, the landowners, and said, okay, now we need to define what is a phase 1. What do we really need to do so that eventually the government will get us off the hook, that the government will say, okay, you did enough, you really exercise the due diligence in investigating, and therefore we consider you to be an innocent landowner. So they got together under the umbrella of the American Society for Testing and Material, ASTM, and they created, in 1991, I believe, was the first time that the standard came about, which defined what is a phase 1 environmental site assessment. That means if you go by this standard, then we consider you that you have an innocent landowner defense against the government. And so it was basically what we call a voluntary consensus standard, where various bodies of the industries get together, the developers, the attorneys, the consultants, regulators, where everybody participated to create this standard. And it had, I guess, the legal force of what we call voluntary consensus standard.
Is this all under EPA? Is that the father of this whole thing?
EPA was not involved in it at the time. It was not involved in it at the time. So the only force that it had at the time was basically that it is a standard of the industry. All right. So if you went to the court and then they would say, well, dear court, the industry in general, society in general, agreed that this is what I did is right. All right. And this situation continued until about 2005, when the government did the Brownfield Act, and I'm not familiar with the details, but now the EPA got involved in it, and in order to develop a brownfield is a highly contaminated area. In order, the EPA, the government wanted the industry to redevelop a brownfield, those highly contaminated areas, and of course, right away, the lenders and the investors, everybody says we want protection. How are we going to protect us? And then the EPA got into the subject of the phase one, and together with the ASTM, they reviewed it, and nowadays the ASTM standard is a standard which is also acceptable to the EPA as a standard that protects you from the government. But over the years, what happened, the industry in general took this standard as a standard for conducting business, because in real life, how many times you run into an EPA contaminated site? How many times you run? That's very unusual, and we practically today we know almost about all of them. All right, the danger or the risk of buying a landfill that will become a Superfund site is very, very extremely small. I mean, it's basically almost every one of them is known today. But the industry developed this practice as a general business practice, because the industry in general, and especially the lending industry, became very sensitive about contaminated sites, because it's not only the EPA, now every regulator, and not every, but many regulators, regulatory agencies became active in contaminated sites. So we got in the 1990s, we got all these gasoline stations, all these underground storage tanks, okay, and then we got all kind of industrial sites that they did not rise to the level of an EPA Superfund site, but still they were contaminated, and regulators were getting into the act and say, clean it up. And so we had the local regulatory agencies now getting into the act and saying, well, you need to clean it up because you present a certain risk. And so the lending industry became very sensitive to it, and I would say that today the prime mover behind our phase one is the lending industry. They don't want to have these liabilities. They want, when they land on a certain site, they want to make sure that there is a minimal liability there, that they will not hurt their collateral. And the SBA, the Small Business Administration, nowadays have their standard operating procedure, 50.6, whatever, and they have a whole chapter there of the SBA saying that they demand a phase one environmental site assessment for any loan that is backed up by the SBA. It's a very, very detailed procedure. So any SBA backed up loan today on commercial property has to do a phase one, and the phase one has to be done per the standard of the ASTM standard, and which is being refurbished, I should say, every 8 years. Just recently, 2021, we had the last revision of it. So it's the ASTM is keeping current with the industry as it develops with the standard. So we have this phase one environmental site assessment, which is the process which nowadays is being more used to protect the lenders from any whims of regulators around. And So, and they are driving the industry, and we are doing our phase one work per the ASTM standard. So now when we do this site assessment, when we assess something, to assess, meaning basically to find the quality of something, to measure the quality, to measure, like if I have, as I said in one of my presentations, I have a cup of cappuccino, okay, and I want to assess it, I will assess it probably in terms of aroma, in terms of texture, in terms of how nice is the cup, you see. That's how I will determine the value of the cup of coffee or the cup of cappuccino. When we assess, we need a property, we need a certain yardstick how to measure if the property is passing or not passing our environmental assessment. And our yardstick, the ASTM standard invented, is called recognized environmental condition. And this is a term that is unique to our standard, recognized environmental condition. You will not find it, as far as I know, in any other place, only this phase one environmental site assessment standard. And what they say is that if we determine that there is a that the purpose of the standard is to determine if there is a recognized environmental condition on the property or conditions, all right? Once we find them, then what we do with them, it's a different question, and I'll touch upon this also. But the sole purpose of the phase one is to find if there is a recognized environmental condition. And what are the records? So we have three types of recognized environmental condition. I walk into a property, I walk into this Coco restaurant, and I inspect it, and I check all the records, especially, and I say, okay, there is a presence. I see there is a presence here of release of contamination. Okay, there is a release. I see a puddle here on the parking lot, and it smells bad, and I see that it is some bad stuff because I see the drums or the container next to it. It says hydrogen cyanide, whatever. Okay, so I say, okay, here is a hydrogen cyanide. Here is a puddle. Okay, so we have a release, and it is present. Okay, that's two positive things. Okay. So I said, recognize environmental condition. I walk into a yard, I walk into land, and for example, I just did a site for World Energy. It's a big refinery here in Paramount, and they are interested in a site in Yermo. Yermo is over there on the way past Barstow. You go to Las Vegas, a very interesting place, 70-acre bare land. And I went there to inspect it, and 70 acres, and I drive around with my SUV, and I see some piles of illegal dumping. All right? And I see them black and smelling and illegal dumping. I say, well, here is a release, and here is a presence, okay, and it looks contaminated. There are some substances here which I can see. So it's there. It's present, and there is a release, and there is a presence. All right. So what else? I check a gasoline station, and they give me the record. Yes.
I'm sorry. Is there a cure period for something like what you just described? So
By cure, what do you mean?
In other words, you saw a bunch of dump on 70 acres of land.
Yes.
Would the owner have a 30-day period or something like that to clean that up so that it doesn't impact the phase one? Or once you see it, it's on the record?
Well, first off, we need to define what it means on the record, because I don't have any obligation that I'm aware of to report anything of my findings to any regulatory agency. So if it becomes on the record, then it's become on the record between the buyer and the seller. All right. So if I see something that is imminently hazardous to public health and the environment, now the crucial word is, the critical word is imminent, okay? I see a tank with gasoline, and the valve is open and it's leaking gasoline onto the ground, right? And I see I'm not going to walk away from it. I say, I don't handle it, or if you don't handle it, I'm calling, because this is imminent danger to public health. But when I see those piles on the ground, they're not imminent danger. All right. So I don't,
Isn't an important part of phase one to do a historical research on what was on the property in the past? So if you're doing a Coco's restaurant and you find out that there was a gasoline station or a bulk plant here before, that would be an important part of your investigation.
Yes.
And the same with the 70 acres of property out in Yermo. If you do an investigation and you find out there's never been anything built on the property, so the dumping that you see might be just surface contamination.
Definitely, it's just surface contamination. And right away, I called my client and I tell them, look, we have this illegal dumping. We can handle it in one or maybe a couple of few ways. We can, if you want, I can sample them right now and tell you what is there, or it's on the surface. You can purchase it. And my estimate, you have anywhere from 4 spots, anywhere from 10 to 20 truckloads in each spot, and once you purchase it and you redevelop it and you regrade it, so just handle those piles accordingly. Yeah.
So when you said sampling, tell me what type of sampling. Are you going to be drilling core samples, or are you just going to lift it off the surface and put it in a test tube and take it in?
In this specific case, where I see the illegal dumping, it's superficial, okay? It's on the surface.
Okay.
So I already sampled it. What I did is they sent me up there, and I went there, and I went with my hand shovel and with my spade. And what I did, I call it composite samples, because I had several areas, like 4 separate areas, because 70-acre site. So I have several areas. So I go into an area, and I go with my spade, and I dig a little bit of the soil here. They dig. Then I combine the dirt. I put it in a bag, mixed it good, and send it to the lab, and said to them, tell me what you see, because this is a pile. Somebody just spread it around. It's not homogenic.
So does the weather have anything to do with it? Like if you're in a very rainy area, don't you have to be concerned about leaching?
Yes, I would have to be concerned about leaching, but in order for substance to leach, if it is in the dirt, there will have to be a lot of rain, and there will have to be standing water, because something has to drive the contamination down. And there is no standing water, and it's not percolating, it will not.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think that's a problem in Yermo.
No, but I can.
It's a beautiful place. I love the desert, by the way. It's great.
Yeah, well, don't go to Europe.
So, on your site that had that surface contamination with the dumping, if the County of San Bernardino's code enforcement came out there and sent a letter to the owner, now that becomes part of public records of the property, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes they do. I'm not aware that they did it in this case.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So this is one of the recognized environmental conditions, which is there is a release and there is it present. We see it. Okay. Sometimes it could be like you mentioned, record search. Part of the phase 1 environmental site assessment is not only the site inspection. We get records from over 130 government databases, and I just did a phase 1 this week, and I got 2,000 pages of records, which I have to scan all of them, you see. So we get all these records, and one of the records says that, there was a gasoline station there, talk about it, and they released, there was a leak there, okay, and the leak was not handled, okay. So now I have a record of a release and a presence, so we indicate it as a recognized environmental condition. So this is a recognized environmental condition number 1. The condition number 2 is much more complicated. It says there is a release. There is a likely presence from a release. Okay, so likely presence from a release. That's a condition. I'll give you an example. Likely presence from a release. I have this defunct site that used to be a gasoline station, and it is in our city of Artesia, and I know this site because I worked on it a lot, and they already went bankrupt, and they're already probably close to $2 million level spent there, and this is a famous site. It is contaminated. Okay, there is a whole pool of gasoline floating on the groundwater. I'm sorry, you had a question? Oh no.
No,
Okay.
I'm just trying to listen closely.
Okay, so there was a whole pool of gasoline. There is still pool of gasoline floating on the water there. I know the site very well. Not only that, it left the station, it left the property, and moved to the neighborhood. And now, if I was not called, but if I would be called to do a phase one on a neighboring apartment complex there, that is in a close proximity to this plume, I would say, well, here is a condition of release. We know, everybody knows about this release, and there is a likely presence. I'm concerned, I don't know for sure, but you are too close to this release. I'm concerned about a likely presence of contamination on your property because of this known release. So right away, I still recognize environmental condition. And then the second part of it is a likely presence from a likely release. So I go a recent site that I did in the city of Paris, all right? So it's a vacant land, a couple of acres. It's been vacant since the creation of the world, always vacant. And I go there and I go along the fence, and I see on the other side of the fence, huge area full with drums, and the drums are corroded and in a very bad shape, and I see some stains on the ground, and so I'm standing on this side of the fence and the drums are on this side, so I take my camera and go to the other side of the fence with my hand, and I take nice pictures of it. And now I'm saying, well, okay, these drums are in a very bad shape. And they used to contain, or maybe still contain, chemicals. Some of them are tilted, they're lying on the side, you see. And I said, well, okay, I don't see a release, but there is a likely release over there. And if it released some stuff, it might have evaporated and moved in the ground to my property. So there is a likely release here, and there is a likely presence here. And right away, I declare recognized environmental condition because of that. So this is the second type of conditions, likely presence and likely release. And then the third one is that I go to a site and I edit and I see all these drums stacked, and they have all these substances and chemicals in them, and they are stacked in a very haphazardous way. And I'm concerned. I say, this thing can tilt any time, right? So right away I say, okay, bad housekeeping, recognize environmental condition. There is a potential. There is a presence. I see the chemicals here. I don't see them on the ground. I see them in the drums. Nothing has leaked yet, but I'm concerned that this thing can leak any time. All right, it can happen any time. So I declare right away a recognized environmental condition, which is, in this case, it's pretty light because then you can correct it. Just put some order,
At which point would you be required to do a phase two in addition to a phase one?
I'll get to it in a second. I'll get to it in a second. I just want to go on one condition, and then I'll get to that. So the fourth condition is a condition which is no condition, which we call it de minimis. De minimis, it I guess come from legal word, which means like not so important. Minimal.
Diminished.
De minimis, de minimis. So the de minimis is I go to a car mechanic shop and I see that the floor is stained, all right, but it's just so he spilled a little bit on the floor. The slab is in a good shape. He has been there, and I look at it and I make like a judgment, and I say, well, okay, yeah, the floor is stained, but it never went down, okay? So I'm not concerned about it. There is contamination. I'm not concerned about it. It's the minimus condition, and I'm not concerned. So now that we declared those recognized environmental conditions, Now we give the report to the owner, we give it to Lou, and Lou says, okay, what's next? What? So now you declare these conditions. What do I do? And I says to him, it's up to you. You are in the real estate, you are in the transaction. Are you concerned about it? Are you not concerned about it? Is the lender concerned about it? I declare the condition. I did my job, okay? Now, most conventional lender will say, stop. Ami said, recognize environmental condition. I'm not lending. I want you to remove this horrific stain from the record, okay? I'm not lending because he did it. So let's put some responsibility on my shoulders because, some transactions depend on whether I say it's a recognized environmental condition. And for me personally, I weigh it with a lot of consideration and seriously. I don't just shoot it off, you know. And so then the lender says, well, I want you to resolve it. And so the way we resolve it is this phase 2 environmental site assessment. And I just did a couple this week. Here is this property. I did not do the phase 1, but the consultant that did the phase 1, they determined that there used to be dry cleaners on the property some years ago. They have not been there anymore. And they are concerned that they have discharged to the land and contaminated. So they declared a recognized environmental condition, and the owner retained me to do a phase 2 because the lender requires a phase 2. And the purpose of the phase 2 is basically solely and only yes or no answer. And we need to understand this. Just a second. There is a widespread misconception out there as what phase 2 does. And the sole purpose of the phase 2 is to say, is it or is it not contaminated? The phase 1 raised the concerns that there could be contamination there. There could be an impact on the soil, but we don't know for sure, all right? So the phase 2 is to say, is it or is it not? Is it contaminated? Is it not? So I went to this site that I just did this week, and I punched holes in the ground, and I came back. I just sent a letter to the attorney this morning, and I said to him, well, there is contamination in the ground, but I don't think it came from your client, and I don't think, not only that, it is minimal, it's de minimis, okay? It is, the levels of contamination that are in the ground are so minimal that I'm giving you a clean bill. It's not a problem. Nobody will go after you. Nobody will ask to clean it up. It's so basically, the phase 2, I said everything is okay. And now they are going to the bank with it, and Ami said it's okay. So now it's on my shoulders.
Right.
But
So you're looking for PCEs and TCEs.
in this case, right?
And if you find, for example, instead of those, if you find gasoline, might be from the gas station across the street.
Except I did not look for the gasoline.
No, I'm just saying.
But if I looked, if I were to find, usually when we go there, we do a whole group of chemicals, not only PC and TC. There's about 70 chemicals that we look for, and in sometimes I get a very high reading on a chemical called xylene or toluene, and these are usually coming from gasoline. So if I get a very high reading on it, and he never used gasoline, then I say, where does it come from?
Yeah.
But in this case, we got reading. They were very much on the low side. I had another client like this in West Los Angeles a few years ago. He had to refinance, and another consultant did the phase 1. They said there is a dry cleaner. We are concerned. I went there. I found the PCE. He was 250 feet away from the dry cleaner. His apartment building. 250 feet away, we found the PCE under the building, but it was in such low levels that we said, it's okay, it's de minimis, okay, it's not important, okay, and we gave him the report and they got the loan.
That also means there's no practicable means of remediating.
Well,
I mean, it's below a level that even if you try to remediate, it wouldn't be effective.
it will not be worse remediation because it is such a low level. Then why remediate it?
Right.
Right. It's such low. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're doing your coring, how deep do you go? And do you go at different levels depending on what you find at the?
Depend
at
what
the
I'm
holes?
looking for.
Yeah. Okay.
If I'm in a gasoline station, if I am a historic gasoline station, sometimes we find cases like this. There used to be 50 years ago a gasoline station here, no record that they ever pulled the tanks, no records whatsoever. And so first off, we go there, and we did it in another place. We go with our geophysical, it's like mine detectors, like metal detectors. Okay, these are electronic devices, ground penetrating radar, transmitters. When we go there and we investigate the area to see where the tanks might have been, if the tanks are still there. And in one case, I did not find the tanks; they were removed. But my ground penetrating radar gave me the texture of the soil under the pavement. And by seeing the texture of the soil right away, I knew where the excavation used to be. And since I knew where the excavation used to be, and I still saw on the pavement the island that used to be the pump island, so right away we went there and we drilled 40 feet down, because groundwater there is about 30 feet. And I said, I don't know anything about those tanks. Somebody removed the tanks. We have no records on them.
Yeah.
All right. So, and this is Long Beach, and groundwater there was about 25 feet. No, yeah, we were about 30 feet down, took samples all the way, took sample of the groundwater, and not only that, we sniffed the soil with, we took some vapor samples, everything came clean. You see, so it's a good case.
Yeah, my dad took a lease on a property at Van Nuys and Albers, which is in Van Nuys in 1956 from the Plummer family.
Okay.
Original Spanish land grant, Plummer family. And it had a gas station and a garage. And in '73, we tore down the old gas station and built a new one with 8 12,000 gallon tanks in the ground. I believe in big storage. And they sold the property to the Miller brothers in 1983 to build Miller Infinity. So they tore down the old garage and the gas station we had just built in '73 and removed the tanks. And everything was fine except when they started construction, they found caramelized gasoline going underneath Van Nuys Boulevard.
Caramelized gasoline?
Caramelized gasoline.
What does it mean, caramelized gasoline?
They said it was so old, it had turned into like a tar, a tarry substance.
Okay.
And that was from the gas station that was originally built in 1924.
Okay.
It had no records. The city had no records, county had no records. It went under, so they just had to dig underneath Van Nuys Boulevard, pull all that soil out. And it's very expensive now to send any sort of contaminated soil to a landfill. Back when I was running gas stations, it was like $1,600 a truck and trailer full. I'm sure it's probably more like $25,000, $30,000 now.
It is.
Yeah.
Once you have to take out the contaminated soil, it is expensive.
Yeah.
And
Do you get into the remediation?
I'm sorry?
Remediation. Do you get into that?
Yeah, I can get into remediation.
You do.
Yeah, I'll get into it. So we do the phase one. So the phase two again is yes or no. Is it contaminated? Is it not contaminated? And so now we do the phase two. We find it is contaminated. We did a project right now in Paramount for big refinery there, and it is contaminated. Phase two. So we say, well, okay, how much is it contaminated? Okay, we say we need to do phase three. What we call phase three. Okay, an extended phase two. Because in the phase two, we at this time, in this case, it was an old machine shop. We only went down under the slab and took vapor samples, and it became highly, highly contaminated. So we said, well, okay, let us go all the way down. And so we came for an extended phase two now, and instead of the first 8 borings, now we had 14 borings, and we went all over the place, and we went down to groundwater, and we took samples every 5 feet of the soil, and we took samples of the groundwater. By the time we were done, it was $80,000. Okay, the original phase two was about 8,000 or 10,000. Now that we expanded it, was like over $80,000. And we gave them a complete picture of what it is, and now they are going to contract with the government to get it eventually. This is it's going. This project is going because it's contaminated. So So the phase 2 is yes or no. Now, once it is contaminated, then you need to decide if you want to go further than that. I had a case recently. I was not a consultant, and the owner came to me and he said, "Okay, here is a consultant. Here is the report. They did the phase 1. Here is a phase 2. And by the way, I don't charge for it. I mean, I love to read these reports because I learned from them, you know. So here's the phase 1. Here they did the phase 2, and now they want to do a phase 3. They want to do even more. And I told them, don't waste your money, because the phase 2, the level of contaminations that you already have in the phase 2 are so high. So all what he will tell you, if he continues to work there, he will tell you that you have more contamination, but you're already at the level where in order to resolve your case, you really have to go to a regulatory agency. And now, when I say you have to, it doesn't mean that the law is that he has to go there. We have to differentiate, okay? Because when I say to him, you have to, I say to him, if you ever want a conventional lender to land on this property with the conditions that you have there right now from the phase 2 that I see, no lender will land on it unless you give them a clean bill of health from a regulatory agency. So unless you're going to a cash deal and somebody is going, and the property is about 900,000 clean, and he's ready to sell it for 600,000, but he cannot even get 600,000 for it on a cash basis. So there's not enough money there to go down. Yeah.
Okay, so as an example, if a property is already identified to the state and it has an approved remediation plan underway, and they've identified the responsible party, does that not say to the lender, you should be okay here because it's in the state fund and it should be remediated and you shouldn't lose your equity if you were to lend against this property?
Okay, since you mentioned the state fund exists only and only for, state fund exists only for underground storage tanks that used to contain petroleum.
Right, that's my business. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. So that's, then I need to switch my thought to your
I
case.
won't derail you, but I want to get an answer to that question.
Yeah, so please ask, so that's fine. I mean, I can move into it on it. So you have a case and it's contaminated and they want to go to the state fund.
It has already been identified. It is in the process of remediation. There's an organization that's sampling it for the people that sold the property to us. We're considering selling it. Again, the issue is we've been told in the state that it's in right now, and it is in the fund. So we're still paying into the state fund, the Lust Fund. And it's got dollars allocated.
Right.
So the question then is, are lenders going to balk if we put it on the market? And does that shrink the pool of prospective buyers and we're just down to cash buyers?
Okay, my answer to that is, first off, it depends on the lender. Number two is the fact that the site is being financed, if you wish, by the cleanup fund. This you're talking about the state underground storage tank cleanup fund. The cleanup fund has a limit of $1.5 million, so of paying back. Okay, so there is a cap on it. So the question is, how far away is the site from the cap? How much money is left for it?
60%.
How 50?
60%.
Okay, 750,000 are still left. Great. So now, if I was the lender, if I was sitting as a consultant to the lender, I would say, let me do some estimate if they can clean it up for $750,000.
I already heard that it probably will exceed the cap. I didn't know there was a cap, but I heard I saw the cap, but I've been told now it'll probably exceed that dollar amount. So then who do you chase?
Okay, now not only will it exceed the cap, but the cleanup fund, this fund that you're talking about, has a sunset date, and it's not far away. Right now we are 2022. I think the sunset date is about 2025. I think, and
Oh, really?
yeah, we are not far away.
It's the same as pulling single wall tanks then.
The what?
It's the same date as pulling single wall tanks, the end of December 2025.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember. But they have a sunset date, and once they reach a sunset date, the fund is gone. Okay, so yeah.
So what happens to all this? We're putting in 2 cents a gallon on every gallon.
There will be no cleaning in the fund.
That's
As far as I know, but
you're talking about the state of California.
Check on it. Just make sure that I'm not wrong. Okay.
Okay.
And my understanding is that at this date there will be no more. That's my understanding, but that's a good question. Ask what happened for a case that is already in the fund. But what happens? They will stop collecting money. You see, it comes to the sunset date, whatever 2025. They are financing the money that they pay you. They are financing from a fee of every gallon of gasoline. It's about whatever 2 or 3 cents on every gallon of gasoline that we pay. They will stop collecting it. They will not collect it anymore. So we'll have no money coming into the fund. Then the question is, how much money is now comes at sunset date? How much money is in the fund, and how much money is there to allocate to the people that are already in the fund? I don't know.
Okay, so then, and if there's a identified responsible party,
Okay.
I know that name too.
Okay.
It's a corporation.
Okay.
So if they no longer exist, then what happens?
If they know that what?
Let's say the responsible party, it's a corporation.
Right.
And let's say that corporation is now defunct. Or let's say it's an individual, it's you, and you're deceased. Who's now responsible, and how do you chase that so you can get the property cleaned up and sell it?
Well,
Can't answer, it's dead.
I can tell you that if the property is not cleaned up, the first thing is you have the regulator sitting on your back, and the regulator will chase whoever is the lowest hanging fruit. They will chase whoever is readily available to them, and they will charge them with the obligation to clean it up.
It's called the deep pockets rule.
Yeah.
Whoever has the deepest pockets,
Yeah.
the bank, or the insurance company, whoever they can get.
Yeah, I've heard that many.
Yeah.
That's why Big Oil was always so cranked up about what's going on this property. We don't need more problems, we need fewer problems. Okay?
Do you have other ways to mitigate the?
Oh, yeah.
You know, like I know they talked about worms or something, and then heating the dirt.
Yeah.
Yes, there are.
It's called soil extraction.
There is a myriad.
Pull out the soil.
There is various technologies how to clean up contamination. It depends on the type of contamination. If we have a dry cleaner that's contaminated and dry cleaning solvents are volatile, they evaporate, then what we do, we stick perforated pipes in the soil and we suck it out. Okay, so that's one way of
And you
remediation.
filter it before you release it to the atmosphere.
That's right.
Right.
But then again, it depends at what rate I'm releasing it. If I'm releasing it at less than 250 CFM, I don't have to filter it. But if I go aggressively, then I have to filter it. But that's the nitty-gritty of the remediation. But if this is dry cleaner, then you suck it out. If this is gasoline that went down to groundwater, well, there is a different technology, okay? And if this is, I don't know, a tar that is sitting, there is different technologies. Sometimes we use bacteria to clean it up. So it all depends.
I heard something about earthworms.
Earthworms?
Was that?
Okay, I guess they are good for something. You know,
So they clean it up.
we had one project where
And
we
in like 2 years, it's
possibly we had a project in Signal Hill where groundwater was contaminated and we installed well. We were injecting nutrients to the bacteria down there. So that the bacteria will eat our nutrients and then they get happy and then they start attacking the gasoline and then they release the CO2 so that they don't suffocate on their own emissions. So then we put pipes to suck out the CO2 so that to invigorate them. So it's kind of yeah. So anyway, so I'm not okay. So we were talking about this phase 2 and phase 3, and there was question here about remediation. And the point that I want to make is a very important point is that we need to differentiate between remediation and mitigation, right? It's crucial, okay, because the concept behind remediation is you clean it up, okay? And then you get to the question, how much do I need to clean up? How clean is clean, all right? And then you get into this battle with the regulator. You say, well, I cleaned it enough, and they say, no, we want you to go the extra mile. And you say, okay, I go the extra mile. Then they say, okay, we want you to go the extra mile. And so, how clean is clean? Who decides how clean is clean? Eventually, it comes down to the lab of the regulator, okay? Because it's not a rocket. I mean, it's not an exact science as to how much we need to clean it up. How toxic is toxic? It's not an exact science, okay? And the rules are changing. So, and because the rules are changing all the time, and
Is that mainly because of the testing procedures are improving?
the testing procedures are improving. They find contamination where we have not found it before. But then you have a whole cadre of toxicologists sitting in regulatory agencies, and they need to decide how toxic is toxic. So they develop, and I'm not a toxicologist, but they work on all kind of theoretical models. And they say if you have so much in the air, and then a person, we want 1 in a million in 70 years. That means we want the level of contamination will be such that not more than one person in 70 years will die out. Okay, so now it's very theoretical. Okay, and then they put a number, a theoretical number, say if the level of contamination is at this number, then we think that no more than one person in 70 years will die out of it, so you are okay. And then a few years after that, they said, no, we want you to go lower. All right. So we learn from them, okay? Because we are not toxicologists. I cannot tell you, okay? So as I'm concerned, it's more dangerous for you to go out in the street, you see.
Yeah, well,
And,
they always taught us at our agency that one solution to pollution was dilution.
and I agree with that. And by the way, this is one of the solutions that I preach. I mean, we have a case we did in Silver Lake in Los Angeles where we, as the site was contaminated with pesticides, at pretty high level, and we told him, well, okay, in order to save he has to develop, so we had about 1,000 cubic yards that we have to take away. And so I said, okay, first you excavate and then you put it in a pile, and put it in a pile. Just don't be very careful about it, just put it in a pile. And then once you put it in the pile, then we go to the pile and now we sample the pile. Okay, so once it is in the pile, of course the level of contamination comes down, and then it is cheaper to get rid of it. And it is all legal. I'm not preaching something here which is illegal, because what you just
Either
said.
that or they keep turning the pile over.
Or turning the pile over and
and
mixing
eventually
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because eventually when it goes to the landfill is telling me, go to the pile, take 5 samples from the pile, mix them together and tell me what you have. So, but anyway, so remediation is very expensive endeavor, because you start and many times you don't know where you end. You depend upon the regulators, and they aim and high, and they are not sure until you go here and go there until they are happy. Okay, so that's kind of a long process. Mitigation is where you prevent the contamination from getting into the living spaces, and mitigation is done all over the place. If you take the whole communities are built on methane field, okay? Methane is explosive, for God's sake. I mean, the contaminations that we deal with are not it's not explosive. Methane is explosive. You have the whole Playa Vista, you have big sections of Beverly Hills are built on methane fields, all right? So what do you do with methane? You cannot remediate it because it keeps coming at you. So there is no way to remediate methane. So then you do mitigation when you put
Except
the
you burn it. Except if you burn it.
If you burn it,
Yes.
yes, but you need to get it to a place where you can burn it.
No.
But then again, it will keep coming at you. It will keep coming because it's coming from down.
That's why some of the contaminated sites, whether it's a gas station or a landfill, they gather the methane and they send it up
you make a power plant out of
right.
it. So yeah, from landfill. So what they do with methane is you put the building there. We did the project in Playa Vista, okay, and you just put these collection pipings under the building, under the foundations, perforated pipes. Then you put the membrane above it, so it will not go into the building, and you connect them to vertical vents, and you vent the methane out and
Flare it.
Maybe you flare it, maybe not. I'm not sure about that. Maybe,
Well-
but that's the way they just release it to the atmosphere above on the roof of the building. So we had a client recently, about a year ago, South Crenshaw, and he wanted to put their 13 to put ghost kitchens because it's not far away from Inglewood and not far away from the new stadium, and he wanted to get into the ghost kitchen business. And he bought the property at a discount, property contaminated with chlorinated solvents. There used to be a laundry there, an industrial laundry. They bought it and they financed it with some hard cash, hard money loan, not regular bank. So they pay higher interest, but they put into the equation, okay, what money, how much they will make from the business. And then we went there. They had to redo the building for all these ghost kitchens, so they had to redo the floor. So I told them, okay, just remove the entire floor, about 6,000 square feet. Just remove the floor slab, cut trenches into the ground, put perforated pipe into the trenches, cover the trenches, put blanket of sand. On the sand, put a membrane. On the membrane, put the new concrete. The pipes are connected to vertical pipes, and the building is protected. And he did not report it to any regulatory agency, and I don't know that he's obligated to report it. And everything is fine, you see. So he's operating.
I'm sure everybody's driven over the Sepulveda Pass. There's the Mission Gate landfill, closed landfill, and they built condominiums around the edge of the landfill and covered the landfill with a membrane where they're collecting the gas from the landfill, because I've inspected a couple of times, and the gas is piped over to UCLA and used as boiler fuel.
All right, here you are.
So, yeah.
So there are solutions to contaminated property. I had one in Bell Garden, and he bought it contaminated. He did not know, poor guy, and he was out for the money. He had to sell it. He sold it for $3.5 million when it was worth clean about $4.5 million. He sold it for $3.5. My client purchased it. He spent with us about $200,000, and we investigated it under regulatory agency, and we brought the case to a place where they issued LCU, land use covenant. And land use covenant meaning we recognize that property is contaminated. You are going to use it for industrial use, so therefore you don't have to clean it any further than that. If you ever want to make it into a kindergarten, you will have to clean it, okay? But as long as you stay industrial, we are fine with that. The soil is contaminated, groundwater is contaminated, soil vapor is contaminated there. We all know that the contamination is in place, okay? But we got the LUC, land use covenant, and he sold it for $6.5 million a couple of years later. You see, sold it, and it's operating as an industrial building. All right, so it can be done. And another client very similar to that, close to LAX, he wanted his car rental agency. And again, we know he was sitting on a contaminated cloud that's coming from a property nearby. So we did the same thing. We removed the floor, we put the pipes under the ground, we vented the building out. He's clean and he's there, and he's doing his business, renting cars. So it can be done. Let me see if I have anything else.
So on the venting and the vapor barriers and all that other stuff, is that something that in your business what you do, or do you work in that field as being the consultant to help the owner come in and bring in a company to do something like that?
I can do it. Yeah, I can do it both, but I prefer to work as a consultant project manager. This is what I did in the case of the ghost kitchens, because I don't do it day in and day out. And when you do this thing, okay, what do? You have some concrete work to do, you have some piping work to do. So So I prefer, in these cases, I'm a general engineering contractor. I can be a contractor, can take it as a contractor, but it's not worth for me, and I'll have to mark it up significantly. It's better for the owner if I work as a project manager, and then I help them retain the subcontractors and do it, because this is simple, okay? If you just put the piping, you vent it out, and you go home, okay? In another case where we are moving now to another project where I will probably be the general contractor, because they will require some remediation. We will have to put the pipes in, and we will have to put the machines, and we will have to suck it out, and we will have to monitor it. It will not be just install something and go home, okay, like in a barrier. We will have to be there for the next few years and keep venting it and giving reports. So then I will visit the general. So
Talk for a minute about the timing of how the defined remediation plan is supposed to roll out. Is there a definitive, you do this and as soon as that's put into place, all we gotta do is monitor and we're good to go? Or can they continue to ask for more assessment and more remediation?
it depends what is the goal of the agency. If the goal is to remediate, then we need to be there and keep sucking out the contamination, or keep treating it or sucking it out until we get to the point where they say it's good enough, okay? So we cannot just leave it and go home. So
let's say so in a property we own,
you know what?
they did it, in a property we own,
Yes.
there is a existing monitoring wells and they're being regularly checked. And now we're being told that the agency may require more core sampling and identification of the plume and go further. And
Where is the property located approximately?
where?
Where? What county?
Imperial.
Imperial County.
It's Colorado River Water Board.
It's Colorado River Water. Yeah, I've never worked with them, so I don't know how good or bad they are. I don't know. But I have a case here in Los Angeles County, in the city of Los Angeles. That's Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. We told them in 2011, close the case, okay, because we are sitting in La Brea tar pits, okay?
Oh.
Yes, the gasoline leaked, the station leaked gasoline. We acknowledge that, okay? But nobody is using the groundwater there. It's all full of tar, okay? And we cannot clean it up anyway because it's getting mixed with the tar, okay? 2011 we did it. Now we are 2022, and they refused to close the case, and we had to retain a special consultant that goes above my pay grade, okay? We had to retain a special consultant and paid him close to $250,000, like an attorney, you know, just to help us move it. And we had to go against the local regulator to go up to the state level and make a petition over there. And until at the state level up in Sacramento, they decided that yes, it can be, we don't have to clean it up. You're sitting in tar, which we told them in 2011. So, but after $250,000 with another consultant, plus another, probably close to $500,000 in state fund, in this case, money, $750,000 later, now they say you can close it because it is in the tar, okay?
How does anything get done?
I'm sorry?
How does anything get done? How does anything get done?
How does anything get done?
When you have this-
It is hard. You say so. It depends. It depends whom you deal with. Okay, there are certain regulatory agencies which are very, very hard to deal with. And if you come to me with a case, if you come like with the case of gasoline station, I don't know this Colorado River, but some cases are very hard, and some cases because the regulators will just not close them. So I don't know why, you know, but they don't close them.
Well, there's money to be made.
Maybe. But I like to work with the DTSC, Department of Toxic. My projects, I like to take them to the DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control.
I'm sorry?
My friend.
Okay, yeah.
Department of Toxic Substances Control. I worked with the office in Chatsworth, and there is another office in Cypress. And They are much more reasonable, and they will listen. But they don't deal with petroleum. Okay, they don't deal with gasoline station.
It's a
When
water
we-
board.
It's a water board. When we deal with groundwater, that's a water board. But if it's not groundwater, and it's only a slight case of groundwater, if it's not a gasoline, if it is an underground storage tank, it's a water board. That's it. You are doomed. But if it is,
Sure,
if it's a dry cleaner, etc.
We're pretty screwed. At the end of the day, we're
What
pretty
is that
screwed. with this
DTS?
program.
Is it DTSC?
Department of
Substances
Toxic
Control.
Substances Control. It's a department of California EPA, of Cal EPA. Yeah, and I did several projects with them. I like them. I can talk to them. I even got letters from them that they like me. And I did not ask for them. They just sent me appreciation letters for the reports that they did. They even, in Chatsworth, they even invited me to give them seminars, 3 seminars I gave them to the regulators over there. So,
You know a guy named Andy Cano?
no, I don't know the name.
He's in Chatsworth.
In Chatsworth? What's his name again?
Andy Cano, C-A-N-O.
No, I don't know
Andreas
him.
Cano, Eugene Cano.
No, but I walked there, there were like 40 of them sitting,
Yeah.
and I gave them a presentation. So, yeah. So, let me see if I have any other points. I would say like metal salvage yards, they usually we expect them to be contaminated, but then again, we had a case like this in Riverside. When you have like a metal salvage yard, or the contamination will be shallow, okay? Because again, remember, in order for contamination to enter into the ground, something has to drive it into the ground, all right? It will not travel all by itself. All
Doesn't
right?
that depend on what the fluid or liquid
What
is?
the source is? Yeah,
Yeah.
if you have a dry cleaner sitting there and it's
No, but in the junkyards that I inspected, it was transmission fluid, it was coolant, it was waste oil. They had a whole list
Battery acid.
of contaminants, and they
I
were
agree
all
with you.
leaking into the ground.
They are all into the ground. Definitely, they are all into the ground now. So you go to this site, and this is, let's say, a 20 or 30 acre site, or whatever, 10 acre site, okay? And you go there, and you know it is in the ground, and we tested one of them, and we found it in the ground. Everything that you said, all this good stuff, it's in the ground, okay? But then, they are going to redevelop it into a multi-residential complexes, okay? So what do? They regrade it anyway. Okay? When they take such a site, they regrade it. Okay, so and they always take the soil away. Okay, so you move it out, you put it in the piles, you make sure that the piles are mixed good, and then you take it to the landfill, and it will cost you a little bit more, you see. But when you do such a huge project, that's an incremental cost to the project, you see, and it can be worked out. I mean, I did a project in Silver Lake. By the time we were done, it was $500,000 there. It was used to be a Terminix place, and we removed 1,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil. We removed how many? Hundreds of tons of concrete that was contaminated. Okay? But by the time we were done, it was about $500,000 and cost, and then now they have a 16-unit apartment building there, 16 apartment building, sitting there in Silver Lake, and it's a very prime place, you see. So I guess it worked for them. I did not do the equation, I did not do the numbers, but it worked for them. So, but I guess.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Once these contaminants get into the water table, that's it. They can't do anything about it. It just goes out into the public water system.
No. When it gets down to the groundwater, not every groundwater is being used for the public water system. I mean, lots of groundwater is not in use. We have what we call the first aquifer, which is the first groundwater, and mostly this is not in use. When they get water, they get it from down below them, from other
There's
aquifers,
several aquifers.
which are
The what?
There's several aquifers.
Oh,
And the
okay.
soil acts as a natural filtrate.
Oh, okay.
An aquifer is like you go to the beach, okay, and you dig a hole in the beach and into the sand, and it's getting filled with water. That's an aquifer. Basically, an aquifer is soil which is saturated with water. Now, so there is what we call the first atmospheric aquifer, which is the first layer, which is exposed to the atmosphere, and the water gets into it.
So it's very difficult for it to get into the water table then, because it's being
It
filtered.
depends. It depends. Some areas it's easy. Some areas it's difficult. I mean, you go along the river, the Santa Ana River or whatever, and you see in some areas they recharge water into the groundwater. You see those pools,
Recharge basins.
and they have some recharge basins, and they recharge it to the groundwater. So it depends where you are. But then again, the groundwater that they pump out, they pump it from deeper aquifer, and if the aquifer is, and they always have filtration, the water companies always have filtration systems and purification systems. By the time you get it, you drink it, it's clean.
Yeah. City of Orange, where I live, is largely between Colorado River and groundwater. And they have all these wells spread out over the city, and all of the water that they pump out has to be sent to a filtration plant. So,
Yeah.
and they test it regularly.
You know, all the sewage of Los Angeles County, I think, goes to the public water treatment plants. There in Hyperion plant, there is one close to the airport. There is a huge plant which cleans sewage water, sanitary sewage, all right? And then what do they do with it? They pump back to the water. There is a whole network of piping going back to irrigation of fields. And the people that operate it told me that this water, the quality of the water is like drinking water, but nobody wants to drink it, of course. So it goes for irrigation. But you can clean water.
Yeah, you'll see the signs around Griffith Park that says irrigated with recycled water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's clean water.
yeah. Yeah.
So I don't have any more points to discuss unless you have more questions.
So the phase 3 is just a continuation of checking for contamination.
Correct. But it's again it's a name that we invented. Somebody I call it a phase 3. Somebody else may call it different. You see, we have a pretty standard names now for phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is a report. We tell you what to worry about. Okay. Phase 2 is we tell you if you really have something to worry about. Okay. And then we take samples, and then from there on you can call it phase 3, phase 4, phase 5.
Yeah. What do people have to worry about with fracking?
Okay, I'm not dealing with it, but the fracking, yes, but basically you break down all the minerals there, and it comes out all this.
They're shooting like a solvent into the ground,
Yeah.
They have a drill bit going and horizontally, and
Yeah,
they're
they're
with
shooting
perforations
solvent,
in it, and they're putting some sort of a solvent to break down the petroleum that's hidden in the rocks. But when it comes up, I mean, you see on Sunday on 60 Minutes, you see people that are igniting the water coming out of their kitchen faucet, and you see people complaining about methane contamination, and so that a lot of people are up in arms against fracking.
Is it? Okay.
But some states allow it and some states don't. I think California has prohibited it, if I'm correct.
Hey Lou, frack you.
And I was going to pay for your breakfast.
So I'm available to you now or later or anytime. You take my card, go. My name is Ami Adini, and my website is amiadini.com. And so you have my contact information there, and some cards. And thank you.
Thank you.